Here we have a really interesting, really complex chart, actually. There's just so many planets that are inimical with each other in respect to Taджaка relationships. We've got Mars and Venus, and they're within orb. We've got Jupiter and Mercury within orb. Mercury, Saturn within orb. Jupiter, Saturn are, they're just, let's see if they're there. Jupiter and Saturn are just barely within orb. And then Saturn and Sun are within orb too. So not only do we have a lot of, malefic Taджaка relationships, they're all within orb of each other pretty much. Okay? So this is going to create a lot of psychological tension in this person, and they're going to have a lot of, psychological holes that they need to fill, and they'll be able to fill if the planets are causing yogadas, or which they won't be able to fulfill if the planets aren't fulfilling yogadas. Okay, at which point the person will always have some big element of their life that's not coming together, that's missing, because psychologically they just can't be open to it. Okay, starting with, another thing you'll see is that all these things are sort of surrounding the 7th house a lot too. With 3 planets in the 7th house, right away relationships are going to be a big outlet for the important experiences in this person's life. Then we've got Venus, the 7th Lord, is another one of the planets involved in an unfriendly Taджaка aspect as well. Okay? So let's go through those. Starting with the strong ones in the 7th house, Jupiter and Mercury. They're less than 2 degrees apart. Just 1 degree, 32 minutes apart, it looks like. Okay? So that's 1.5 years of age. Some trauma comes into this person's life. So Jupiter's the 2nd house, the house of family, the house of house of family, the house of their inherent self-worth, the worth they get from being responsible. It's also the 5th Lord, the Lord of self-esteem, the Lord of being secure as an individual. Mercury is the 8th Lord, the Lord of emotional security, and the 11th Lord being validated by others. Now, whenever you see the 8th Lord and 2nd Lord, the Lord of emotional security and the Lord of material security, related with each other, in an unfriendly Taджaка aspect, right away there are some, early things that happen in life that really rock the person's sense of security. Okay? Something that afterwards is going to make them really want to cling to something materially concrete. Okay, they need something they can hold on to after that. So these people will tend to be more focused on finances, having money in their lives, something to make them feel materially and emotionally secure, because there's always some early trauma that comes into play. So this person's happened at a very young age, and what it was a loss of a family member. 2nd house, family, 8th house, death and destruction. Create some kind of tragedy, some tragic events. You remember that other chart we saw with a lot of 8th house and 2nd house yogas, all the tragedies that person underwent. So the 2nd and 8th house, those are the houses that make us feel secure and really safe in this world as far as just being able to survive. 2nd house is getting the food and things we need to survive. 8th house is just living. So those are the security things we really need to survive. So when there's bad yogas going on, difficult aspects, something survival has been threatened. In this respect, it was the loss of a family member. Now, the 5th house is the house of, being secure as an individual. The 11th house is being secure, in the group, or being socially secure. Now, those things aren't necessary for our survival. They don't threaten our sense of survival in this world the way the 2nd and 8th house does. They have to do with our ability to stand with others, to stand on our own terms, to coexist with others, to live at peace with ourselves, and to live at peace with others. So it's more like that. But just when it comes to survival, 2nd and 8th house are critical houses. So there's a trauma that goes on this early in this person's life about, survival due to the loss of a family member. Okay, and obviously they were close to this family member because there's such a small aspect between these two planets, and it happened early in their life, so it was a big tragedy. Now, Mercury's in a friend sign, luckily, but Jupiter, unfortunately, is in a natural enemy sign. So this person's, material security is going to be weak. It's not going to be something they're able to rise above. They're not going to really feel secure in being able to provide for themselves, be responsible for things, and take care of themselves. Okay? Fifth house is their security as an individual. That's also going to be something that's weak. Okay? As a result, this person, one of the main important things when they finally chose their marriage partner was that they had money and that they could take care of them. And by having money, I don't mean they were a millionaire, but they had a good, solid job. They lived in a good neighborhood. They were able to provide material security. And that was important to this person, their choice of marriage partner, simply because this Jupiter was a psychological hole, and they themselves didn't feel like they could develop their own resources, okay, which is Jupiter. Instead, we see Mercury as the 8th lord, which is other people's resources, being in a friend sign, and being interchanged with Venus, the 7th lord, in the 8th. So that's marrying for, other people's resources to some degree. Not that there wasn't other stuff there too, but there was other people this person had been with that they rejected simply because they didn't feel like that person would be able to those people would be able to take care of them materially. And they went with the one that they thought they could, even though in other regards they liked some things about the other ones better. It was a big, important thing. And that makes sense because they get Jupiter, the lord of their resources, in the 7th house of marriage, and also other people's money in the 7th house of marriage. So, finances and security becomes an important part of their marriage, of their marital needs. Okay, but difficulty rising above that. Okay, now these are both within orb of the sun, I think. Let's double check that. Mercury. Okay, they both just barely missed the orb of the sun, but they are both within the orb of Saturn. Saturn is the 3rd lord, the lord of being socially able to work with others, in relationships, in partnerships, to achieve goals as teammates and so on. And Jupiter, the 2nd house of, self-worth, being materially secure, and the 5th house of being secure as an individual. And of course, Saturn rules the 4th house, the emotional, contemplative house. So there's a lot of tension about this person, how they feel, 4th house, how they act socially, 3rd house. It's their ability to work socially, okay? Their social skills. And, what their material needs are, 2nd house, and how they just feel secure as an individual. How does that all spell out? The person is really conflicted in being themselves, 5th house, in a relationship. Why relationship? Well, obviously because Jupiter's in the 7th house. They feel conflicted with being themselves and still being socially able, 3rd house. There's conflict between that Saturn and Jupiter. And they're both, unfortunately, they're both in bad dignity. So they're not going to be able to rise above this conflict of being socially able while still just being themselves and sticking to who they are. Okay? And being socially able, 3rd house, well, that's, the difficulties. 3rd house is the house of difficulties. And the 3rd house is where we deal with our difficulties with other people's in a productive way somehow. And that's, productive way means largely through good communication. The 2nd house is the house of speech, but the 3rd house is the house of communication, which requires speech and listening. And the 3rd house, of course, is the house of listening. And know what's so funny? The 3rd house represents everything that's difficult. And isn't it a funny thing that people have such a hard time listening? It's a difficult thing to really listen. Most people can't do it well. If you have a great 3rd house, you'll be a good listener. So communication is listening and speech. And the 3rd house is that house of communication. Second house is speech specifically, but the third house is a secondary house of speech. And so you see how the third house is the communication house. And, being socially able largely means having the ability to communicate with people, and whether that communication happens verbally or like on a football team or a baseball team with hand signals, is communicating your intent so that both people can make something happen between them or between a group of people. It could be individual people, group people, doesn't matter. Just being socially skilled and able, which largely revolves around communication. And you can see this person's conflict in that, in being who they are and trying to be socially able and communicative. They're both in bad dignity. Jupiter and Saturn are both in natural enemy signs. They're both sleeping. So they just freeze up on that. And they just have a total inability to communicate to their peers, to their siblings, to their partners, to whatever. And they don't feel comfortable there because their self-esteem is threatened. So this person, suffers in their relationships because they're just socially retarded. They're very socially retarded. In fact, one time this client told me when they came in, they said, well, people misunderstand me. I'm just like my mom. They said, my mom's the same way. People just don't understand our intention, and so they get upset at us, and, they don't get understood. And I just simply asked her, do you even try to communicate your intention when you're misunderstood? And she just kind of got a little proud and said, no. Why should I even have to communicate with these lower people, with other people? If they just don't get me, too bad for them. And I don't really care enough about them to communicate and try to work it out. That was sort of their attitude. And that's the result of this Saturn-Jupiter, aspect going on. The Saturn-Jupiter being on angles and unfriendly from each other. And it also comes into play with Mercury, too. Because Mercury, of course, is getting validated by others. Mercury's being emotionally secure. Saturn's being socially able. They can't be socially able in such a way that they're able to really feel emotionally secure and safe with another person. And so they've had some big frustrations in their relationships. And Jupiter Dasha was especially frustrating when, their boyfriend at the time got so irritated over just not being able to make things better that he eventually just went out and fell in love with another girl, and she got her heart broken. But there wasn't room for negotiation, communication in the relationship that any problems could get worked out, unfortunately. So the person's attitude, if they just don't get me, too bad, and they don't try to change, even if they're really in love with the person, unfortunately. So that's a difficult aspect of the Saturn, Mercury, Saturn, Jupiter. And Saturn is just not going to get more socially able. It's sleeping. And how do they really feel about it? That's the fourth house, right? How they really feel. Their ability to contemplate their feelings. Saturn's sleeping too. So, when they're feeling emotionally insecure and scared, do they want to really feel it? Do they really want to deal with those feelings? No, there's a conflict there. Being able to really feel their fears, their lack of emotional security, which is the 8th house Mercury Lord. And so Saturn just doesn't want to go there. And again, the angular houses are the most important houses because that's initiating the action. The 4th house is initiating any emotional action. If it's sleeping, like the Saturn sleeping, then if we're not willing to initiate and see how we really feel, how can we really be emotionally secure? How can we really take advantage of our 12th house emotional ability and contemplative ability? We can't really fully take advantage of it if we're not doing it and not, activating it. So those angles, the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th are so important because they're the ones that get us to do it. And then we get the fruits and the abilities from the other houses. But the angles are the houses that get us up to do it. So this person emotionally just doesn't want to go where it's uncomfortable because of Saturn's sleeping. And where is it emotionally uncomfortable? In lots of places, because Saturn's making an unfriendly aspect to Mercury and to the Sun. So what is the Sun? The Sun is the 10th Lord, materially secure in their actions. or not materially secure, but being confident in acting materially, doing something materially, the willingness to take material action. They're not, okay, because that Sun and Saturn is conflicted with fourth house, what they really feel like doing, okay, and their, lack of social ability, which conflicts with their need to go do something. So because they feel socially awkward, that's in conflict with their need to act materially. So it becomes frustrating and painful for this person to go to work, for instance. They just don't feel at peace there because this conflict between Saturn and Sun. And they're both sleeping. Sun's sleeping in Taurus and Saturn sleeping in Leo. They're both in a natural enemy sign. So there's no yogadas here. This person is not going to rise above their feelings of social inadequacy and go out and do something great in the world. Okay? Instead, this person was happy to marry a person that was going to take care of them and just sit around at home. And they don't even want to have kids either. They don't want children. And you can see with Jupiter, the fifth lord, sleeping in the seventh with natural enemy Mercury and with Sun, that's not good for children at all. Okay? They don't want to have kids. They're just happy being at home, doing their own thing, and not being 10th house materially productive, because that Sun is sleeping and that Saturn sleeping. Why? Because it's just too conflicting, too painful for them to go out into the world and be socially active and make things happen with other people, which any type of work we do requires that. A good third house is a nice thing. When you read Parashar's results on the third house and third lord, when you get a nice third house, it makes you just it makes you a great person for doing things with, because you're skillful, you're able, you're socially skillful, you're adaptable socially, you can negotiate socially, you can work with other people. Almost everything we do requires an element of teamwork. And so a nice third house helps us do that teamwork better. This person can't do it. Teamwork is very stressful for them because Saturn's making lots of unfriendly aspects. Now, Saturn does have some friendly aspects to help him, meaning to help Saturn, get some comfort in life. But Saturn's never going to be great because he's sleeping. The main aspect is the moon. Venus is a little out of orb. Yeah, Venus is out of orb, unfortunately, but we have the moon aspecting Saturn friendly. Moon is the ninth house, which is their philosophy, which helps them feel able as an individual, and helps them, find meaning in the sense of individuality that they have, defines their sort of purpose. So the moon here, aspecting this Saturn, does soothe Saturn a little bit and make them feel it's okay for them to do what they're doing. It's okay for them to not really be socially, adaptable and able. And, the moon aspecting here helps them deal with their emotions that they don't want to deal with it through some philosophical ideas or ideals and things like that. So they're happy to, spend some time at home practicing yoga, dealing with their emotions through yoga, but not really completely going there because the Saturn is sleeping. But it soothes Saturn a little bit and gives a little more happiness in life. But, this moon is not going to make up for these unfriendly aspects it has going on with Mercury and the Sun, okay? Especially the Sun-Mercury thing. So it's not indicative of a really productive horoscope, unfortunately. We have two angular lords sleeping, Saturn, the fourth lord, and Sun, the 10th lord, are both sleeping and in conflict with each other and in conflict with other planets as well. Okay, that's all those planets. Then we've got the Mars-Venus. Okay, now Mars is the strength of themselves in action. There's their ability to act upon their own instincts and desires and sense of self, along with their, partnership needs, 7th house Venus, their needs to act in the context of their partnerships, okay? And you can see Venus here and Mars, though they're in conflict, and there is tension with them being themselves and fulfilling their, moving towards their relationship needs. While there is that tension there, they're both in natural friend signs. So Mars and Venus are causing yogadas. And this will help them rise above that frustration of that, that conflict about being themselves while being involved in relationships, while acting upon their relationship needs. Okay, there'll be conflict within that, and they will do some frustrating things. But overall, over time, they'll rise above that, and they'll be able to find themselves at peace with their partner and at peace in their, in fulfilling their relationship needs. Okay, which is good because relationships are such a big part of this person's life with so many planets in the 7th house. But they won't be able to do it the most easily simply because Venus is in the 8th house. Okay, that's indicative of more than one marriage. Venus in the 8th Lord in the 7th, that interchange there, and you combine that with the Sun, there's room for that. And Scorpio Lagna is, likely more than other Lagnas to go through a divorce, simply because Mars rules the 1st and 6th house. When you relate the 1st and 6th house together, that can indicate the person initiating a divorce possibly. Okay? So this person is now in Mercury period. Okay? Or not yet. Not yet. But they're going to be in Mercury period soon. And right now they're in Saturn-Jupiter period. And you can see by them being in Saturn-Jupiter period that, these two planets are both sleeping. It's the end of Saturn period. It's going to be an emotionally not the most happy time. It's the 4th house of happiness. The person's not going to be happy in Saturn-Jupiter. They won't feel a sense of purpose in their love life. They just won't feel happy. Saturn is the 4th lord of happiness. Jupiter's the Karaka of happiness. They're both sleeping. They're just not going to be really happy in Saturn-Jupiter. Then Mercury period kicks in. Mercury is the 8th lord in the 7th. Interchanged with the 7th lord. And so, it's not likely for their relationship to maintain being stable over that time. In the Navamsha chart, we can see that Mercury rules the 9th lord. The 9th bhava. An important bhava in the Navamsha. It's in a natural neutral sign, but it's at Mrityu Avashta, or not Mrityu Avashta, I'm sorry, it's at the very end of the sign in the Varga. And planets in the Varga, as they get to the end of that Varga, they lose strength. So Mercury doesn't have a lot of strength here. Okay? Mercury's conjunct the Sun in the Rashi chart, which is going to agitate the Sun, right? And hurt it, according to Lajitadi Avashtas, or get agitated by it. And then Jupiter's with Mercury, fortunately, which will help give Mercury some happiness. And Jupiter's in a neutral sign, so he can, in the Navamsha, natural neutral sign, so he can give Mercury some happiness. But it's not a great Mercury at all. All in all, it's not a great Mercury. Okay, and then from Leo Lagna in the Navamsha, Mercury rules the 2nd and 11th house. Houses can disrupt that Varga. So they're in for a bit of a difficult path. And in Taджaка, we see that Mercury be a little frustrating simply because it's, in unfriendly aspect with Saturn. Okay? And then Mercury's combust too, unfortunately. So, the value of their relationship, the 8th house, and the emotional security that comes from that will be frustrated in Mercury period. Okay? Good antardashas can boost some things, but in a bad antardasha, things can be really troublesome. But anyway, getting back to Mars-Venus. So Mars-Venus does show some frustrations in their, being, in relationships, 1st and 7th lords, some big differences in partnerships, her needs versus partner's needs. But eventually be able to rise above that and have some good partnerships through them. So Mars and Venus dashas will allow them to make productive, choices in their relationships and also have success in life and do something more productive in life, because Mars is the Lagna Lord, which is all about going out into the world and being who you are. It's just Mars dasha and Venus dasha are nowhere in sight. Okay, they'll get the sub-period of Venus in a couple years. Okay, but it's not perfect by any means. So this chart is not a really strong chart. You can see how, there's a lot of planets that are at odds with each other, that are in unfriendly aspects, that are not getting helped out really by any friendly aspects, and then too many sleeping planets involved. 1, 2, 3 sleeping planets in this combination of these 4 planets here. So not a materially productive person, that 10th Lord involved. Not an emotionally productive person because that Saturn's involved. So not someone who really wants to, take the risk of growing emotionally either, unfortunately. Okay? But someone who's got strong relationship needs simply because they got so many planets in their 7th house. Unfortunately. Okay, so a little bit of a sad chart here because it's not a real happy ending chart because the yogadas are not there. I'm calling them yogadas, which means yoga producers, but I mean the yoga karakas are not there. They're just not going to boost this chart above their psychological limitations. So a person who for the most part is going to be limited by their psychological limitations, meaning what they're willing to embrace, what they can handle comfortably in most respects as far as their material success is concerned, especially with with the Sun, the 10th Lord, and Jupiter, the 2nd Lord, 2 material houses being involved. So this person's not going to really do anything materially. But they can find happiness in relationship, in love, let's say, in their need for another person, because Mars and Venus, though they have difficulties of surrounding that, Mars and Venus are in good dignity. And so they will have that, at least, work into that in their sub-periods and so on. Okay, thank you.